Over the past several lectures, we've been approaching graphic medicine along a few wide avenues, from its overt modern expression in the second half of the 20th century, from its connection to and roots in comic studies, to its relationship to other contemporary fields of study, and to its emerging applications in healthcare education and medical and psychological practice. Assuming any success with that bevy of topics, I've shed my beard, and I'm going to take the liberty of making this last lecture one that I usually share in tandem with students selecting their own graphic medicine topic of interest about my own research area, namely the portrayal of cancer and cancer narratives in works of graphic medicine. There is no textbook on what I call cancer comics, at least not yet. So for the purposes of having and organizing work around which to contextualize the discussion of cancer and its history, I utilize the Pulitzer Prize winning The Emperor of All Maladies, a biography of cancer by Siddhartha Mukherjee. Of course, several other books, such as Cancerland, a medical memoir by David Scadden, or even a prose biography, When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. I think I pronounced his name wrong. Kalanithi, also merit strong consideration as the backstop for such an exploration. One of the many reasons I like Mukherjee's book in the context of comics is the thought that the published comics medium and the modern treatment of cancer rose at approximately the same time. That is, Mukherjee recounts that President Taft proposed a national laboratory dedicated to cancer research in 1910. And in 1920, freshman Senator Matthew Neely called for a $5 million reward for any information leading to the arrest of cancer. By 1937, Neely, in returning to the Senate, pushed through a bill for the National Cancer Institute Act. Comic books, and later graphic novels, come out of this same moment in history, with many newspaper comic strips being collected into their own books circa approximately 1920 to 1930. Ultimately, readers wanted original content, not just repackaged reprints, and the comic book industry was born. By the 1970s, concurrent with the rise of underground comics, aka comics, not intended for children, the full-length graphic novel likewise emerged. This was approximately the same moment as the National Cancer Act of 1971, with a critical increase in the magnitude and vigor of the nation's efforts in cancer research. Thus, contemporary cancer treatment and this American ninth art rose at a conspicuously similar time. That could easily be coincidence, of course, and plenty of other media and medical advances could be roughly slotted into a parallel timeline. Instead, I read a number of other compelling overlaps between comics and cancer that suggest to me some sort of relationship, some symbiosis, which is a fitting segue, given that the way Mukherjee discusses cancer and the way a number of comics protagonists do closely echo each other. In his chapter Of Black Color Without Boiling, Mukherjee explains it lives desperately, inventively, fiercely, territorially, cannily, and defensively, at times as if teaching us how to survive. To confront cancer is to encounter a parallel species, one perhaps more adapted to survival than even we are. This image of cancer as our desperate, malevolent, contemporary doppelganger is so haunting because it is at least partially true. A cancer cell is an astonishing perversion of a normal cell. It exploits the very features that make us successful as a species or organism. Mukherjee later adds, if we as a species are the ultimate product of Darwinian selection, then so too is this incredible disease that lurks within us. Such metaphorical seductions can carry us away, but they are unavoidable with a subject like cancer. In writing this book, I started off by imagining my project as a history of cancer, but it felt inescapably as if I were writing not about something, but about someone. My subject daily morphed into something that resembled an individual. Cancer, then, is more us than other diseases, perhaps. It is an overabundance and corruption of the cells which constitute us. It seeks the same sort of thriving and existence that we might, albeit without a consciousness. It can be easy, as outside readers, to lose sight of this, wanting to neatly cast cancer as the villain or the antagonist. Why not, when it's killing a character or even the authors themselves? Even in this, though, we talk about the subject of cancer as a person, as an opponent. And in that, we are quietly acknowledging how it comes from within, how it is of us. And inasmuch as we might want to cast those fighting cancer as heroes, we can find an inversion of that scenario in a work like The Death of Captain Marvel. In it, a career superhero was made powerless in the face of cancer. Aliens, invaders, supervillains, monsters, mutants, they all tried, but none of them could kill me. I fought them all and I won. I survived. Who would have thought that, in the end, it'd be my own body that would turn on me and do me in? Moreover, it will turn out to be the source of his superpowers, the negabands, that prevent his colleagues from properly aiding him. In effect, it's his being a hero that is affecting his death. Do not mistake this as victim blaming. Understand it as how personal, how of the self cancer is as a disease. It taps very directly into our understanding of what makes one human, what borders there are to the self, and how life is expected to function. In easily the most tragic and most gut-wrenching moment for me of Marisa Acocella Marchetto's Cancer Vixen, Marisa has to mourn the loss of the child she can now never have due to cancer treatment. Marisa may live, but this child of her imagination will not. The Graphic Medicine Manifesto chapter, Graphic Pathography in the Classroom and Clinic by Kimberly R. Myers, compels a personal note. Myers details teaching Cancer Vixen to her fourth-year medical students, even as she was herself diagnosed with breast cancer. This experience created a bond between teacher and students unlike anything I had ever experienced, she says. I myself have not been diagnosed with breast cancer, but between the preparation, proposal, and start of my spring 2016 Cancer and Comics course, my mother was. The illness had already struck my family in the past. my aunt, a young mother of two, taken in her early 30s, my grandfather, a World War II tail gunner, taken in his late 60s, etc. As sensitized as I thought I was for bringing this topic into the academic classroom, this new occurrence, please excuse the cliche, truly brought the subject home again. Several years later, my mom is doing well, I'm pleased to report. The Death of Captain Marvel, Cancer Vixen, Mom's Cancer by Brian Fias, Seeds by Ross McIntosh, Cancer Made Me a Shallower Person by Miriam Engelberg. These are but a few of the conspicuously large number of cancer comics titles. Second, perhaps only to the mental health category, cancer is the most frequent subject of published graphic medicine titles. One reason may be what I already suggested, that cancer, in addition to its prevalence as a cross-cultural and cross-generational illness, lays potentially within all of us, as it is our own cell-growing process gone awry. Second, the experience of having and fighting cancer lends itself to certain visual metaphors upon which many writers and artists seize. Some of the earliest writing on cancer, says Mukherjee, explained it in terms of an excess in certain bodily humors, an overabundance of black bile swamping a part of the body. It's not difficult to find visual expressions of drowning or being trapped in a cancerous fluid across a number of the titles, such as Mom's Cancer and Cancer Vixen. In Marchetto's book, the flooding is comprised of Marissa's own tears. In fact, she accuses a reflection of herself for her current state. Whatever the cancer's origin, it seems, Marissa holds herself accountable, even if only briefly, for it. Mom's Cancer, Cancer Vixen, Terminally Illing by Kaylin Andrews, but surprisingly not the space adventures of Captain Marvel. All feature visually the metaphor of a black hole appearing in the lives of cancer patients. In fact, the darkness into which the title character of Mom's Cancer is shown as submerged also resembles that facing the dying protagonist of Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean's Signal to Noise, or even the imagined void consuming the mother of I Kill Giants' lead character. Blackness seems the default hue of cancer, and an eruption or an implosion in space is commonly its mark. However, how fitting a visual metaphor is a black hole for cancer when the former is something from which nothing, not even light, may escape. And cancer, for some, is. Certainly the experience of battling cancer may feel, at times, as hopeless as the event horizon of such a gravity well. But perhaps the black hole is better understood as a threshold to the unknown rather than to destruction. That would make the recurrent black hole metaphor more akin to its sci-fi usage, for example, a passage into another dimension, access point to time travel, etc., than its actual cosmic value. And this may in turn explain Captain Marvel's reluctance to utilize it, especially when the dying captain himself also either hallucinates or transcends to a space beyond the mortal frame. Perhaps one of the most challenging yet consistent visual metaphors found in these cancer comics is the depiction of the medical experience as a game. In Seeds, there is a conspicuous flashback to Ross's youth, coming as it does both right after the character is going to sleep and without any transition. Its placement gives it a dreamlike quality, a remembered instance of bonding, with distinctively wavy borders that come to a sudden stop when Ross visits his father at the hospital that next day. He sees the family ball game, spinos, in a manner that could apply to the uncertain and interminable feeling treatment of cancer itself, just bouncing it back and forth. And more overtly, Fias's mom's cancer will prominently feature a number of games as a motif. He frames the journey from mom's osteopath to a meeting with the chief of neurosurgery in terms of a game board. Later, the health as game motif returns, this time being cut along 2 pages. Without resorting to digging up Fias's old website, I couldn't tell whether this division is the result of moving from a more fluid medium like the scrolling computer screen to the dimensions of print, or whether the break between head and body is more intentional, meant to reflect how everything from mom's neck up belongs to the impressive hospital specialists. Everything from her neck down belongs to a team of local cancer doctors. Either way, I recognize that Fias's adapted the Milton Bradley game of Operation to his mother's story. This might leave the reader slowly coming to care for the characters mildly appalled now, recognizing that mom's illness is no game. But what makes its being a story, these being more characters than people, any better? This is a familiar and useful visual trope, helping to advance the plot and deferring to the reader. However, it also seems significant in terms of the graveness of that situation. That is, this is anything but a game, and yet that's precisely the visual being given. Does this alleviate the tension of their circumstances at all? Or conversely, does the misfit of medical treatment framed as a game heighten the tension? In the collected Critical Approaches to Comics, André Mauletu suggests that comics as a medium operate on a tension between the visual and the verbal. Is that being manifested here? As an aside, let me mention that I contacted Fias directly about the Operation 2-pager. Was the Operation style 2-page illustration one complete image on the site? Inoperable was always 2 pages, even online. In fact, a little secret, they don't quite fit together. Oh, I like that tidbit. Thank you. There's a metaphor there. Can I quote you on this? Sure, but it's not like I did it on purpose. Nah, I still like the poetry of it, so to speak. The running from specialist to specialist, test to test, and treatment to treatment must have a manic, maze-like feel to the experience that many traditional board games capture. Additionally, by depicting it as a game, the person in question may feel that the experience has more of a controlled narrative, that it resembles something in his or her life, despite the fact that it's like nothing he or she has experienced before. Finally, the evocation of games may touch upon either the death of leisure time or its sudden overabundance outside of normal work and life, and perhaps the imminent feeling of an end. Games may be close, but they don't exactly fit the experience of a cancer diagnosis and treatment. As I said, the motif may be the closest form that can be envisioned, and therein lies the problem. When Mukherjee discusses his patient Carla, He describes her as standing at the edge of a physiological abyss, which she must now push through. As he describes her progress, it sounds heroic, largely because that is the shared frame many of us can access. When theorist Joseph Campbell posited the hero's journey, otherwise known as the heroic monomyth, in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, he said something similar. Namely, across all the cultures and eras he had studied, all heroes from stories must be pushed to the brink, even to a recoverable death and time in the underworld, in order to complete their quests. Does cancer treatment follow the same pattern? And yet, there are critics aplenty of Campbell's monomyth. And like the game metaphor, it only kind of works, but not wholly. Ironically, it's the superhero genre, with its clean adherence to the heroic narrative, that might give us the best angle at which to see the disconnect. For instance, Captain Marvel knows the origin of his cancer precisely, his handling of toxic gas when fighting the supervillain Nitro. It is only in a superhero comic that this could be identified so easily. While Marchetto or Engelberg puzzle wildly over what caused their cancer, the Captain can pinpoint it to a specific supervillain skirmish. Even for Fia's mother, who likely got cancer from smoking, she can't have it said with certainty. Another example is the very fact that Captain Marvel's cancer cannot be cured by super scientists, sorcerers, geniuses, and demigods. It helpfully underscores a further disconnect. And here is where the necessary suspension of disbelief required for the superhero genre begins to chafe. For a fictional plague, for a super scientific contagion, they could find a cure. But superheroes cannot alter the basic reality of their readers. If cancer continues to exist in the audience's world, then it must continue to exist in the superheroes. In a sense, as Captain Marvel must shed his uniform in favor of a life support tunic, I'm afraid I've lost too much weight to look anything but silly in it. So too are superhero conventions beginning to break down in the story. This is not a weakness of the superhero genre, but a strength. Its willingness at times to let its own conventions revealingly crumble. I would posit, in fact, that the cancer narrative would break down in nearly any story model, and perhaps not as tellingly. This is not to suggest that the attempt is futile or in any way without value. These works, these cancer comics, offer amazing insight, empathy, and voice to their respective experiences. The only question I offer here is whether they are remarkable expressions, but not necessarily shaped narratives. They do not, in fact, fit most shared models of narrative in at least the US market. And in all fairness, they should not be expected to. At the 2018 Comics and Medicine Conference, I suggested that comics were a disoncological medium. That is, its very structure of sequential yet contained panels may work especially well, even unconsciously, for a disease that is unchecked growth, uncontrolled sequence. Any slippage or disconnect is with story models, not with the medium. And if comics is indeed a medium of tensions, where better to express the uncertainty and the conflict of cancer than right here?